The tide had just begun to surrender the morning when I saw the glint, half a palm-sized mirror blinking from a pillow of wet kelp. I was walking the strip of sand I always walk when my head feels crowded, counting gull prints and the soft collapses of little waves, pretending each hiss is an eraser. The phone was face down, case scraped, a loop of seaweed hooked like a careless bracelet around its corner. I picked it up expecting it to be dead, salty done. It buzzed in my hand as if it had been waiting, the screen waking into a name I didn't know. Unknown caller. I hesitated, standing in the wind like a badly drawn statue. Then I slid my thumb across hello. A voice spilled out, bright but breathless, like someone talking while running. Oh, thank God, hello? If you found this, please don't hang up. I've been calling nonstop. I said I had it, that I was on the south end by the dune grass, that the case was blue with a cracked corner. The voice laughed once with relief. That's it. Iris's phone. I'm Rowan. Are you okay? Is it okay? I said yes to everything, even the parts that were probably about more than a phone. Rowan told me Iris takes sunrise photos and never noticed the tide crawling up behind her tripod. She's at the boardwalk kiosk now, borrowing an ancient payphone because she left her wallet in the camera bag and the bag in the car. Could you bring it? I looked toward the boardwalk, wood planking silvered by years of sun, a few sleepy shops resetting chalkboards for the day. The tide snored behind me. I said I could. I wiped the glass on my sleeve, felt the device hum again like a little animal waking, and began walking, imagining the person at the other end of this tether, and why a stranger's voice already felt like the start of something I'd need to keep following. The boardwalk at that hour smelled like hot sugar even without any open stands, a ghost of last summer's donuts, floating over salt. A couple of joggers thudded by, a dog negotiated with its leash, and the gulls executed their congress on the lampposts, pretending the whole town was a stage they'd booked. I found the payphone by the souvenir kiosk that sells shells imported from nowhere near here, and a woman with a braid the color of wet sand was cupping the receiver with both hands. She hung up when she saw the blue phone in mine and walked toward me like she was wading through something heavy and invisible. Iris? I asked. She nodded with the sort of smile that happens after you stop expecting one. Rowan said you found it. Up close I could see ocean spray dried on her jacket, and a tiny smear of soot on her thumb from the kiosk heater. She took the phone gingerly, like it might bolt. I owe you coffee, she said, the familiar local phrase for debt and gratitude rolled together. I said sure, though coffee and I are more acquaintances than friends. My hands shake if a barista even looks at them. We sat on the bench under the map of town with the little star that says you are here. Iris checked the phone with a surgeon's focus, not for messages, but for the photo app. Sunrise is my calendar, she said without looking up. I collect first light like other people collect receipts. There were gulls reflected in her eyes and the kind of tired that comes from waking up on purpose. I asked if she lost it to the tide. Almost, she said. But I'm not great at losing things. She tucked the phone into her pocket, then laughed. Except obviously. Somewhere inside the kiosk a kettle shrieked and was silenced. She stood. The coffee bribes live over there. Come on. I followed, wondering about Rowan, about the way urgency had threaded through his voice, and if that was urgency for the phone or for something larger I hadn't yet stepped into. The kiosk was a half-finished postcard, painted sea glass green, a window cut into it like a smile, and a shelf just wide enough for 2 paper cups and a tiny jar of sugar that had become one solid crystal. Iris worked around the clutter the way people who love small spaces do, like choreography is a form of kindness. She handed me a cup, and I felt the ceramic heat through the cardboard sleeve in a way that made me aware of my pulse. So, she said, are you a beach walker by trade or by temperament? By need, I said. I work from home now, which means I work from the corner table by the plant, which means sometimes I need the ocean to bench press my brain for me. She laughed softly. We stood shoulder to shoulder, not quite strangers but not yet something else, and watched the boardwalk lids opening, a bait shop counter clapping down, a yoga studio propping its door, the ice cream place pretending it wasn't still winter. The town had the warm, gentle rattle of a house waking up. "Rowan's my brother," she said, as if we'd been having that conversation in silence for the past minute. "He worries. Sometimes it's a sport, sometimes it's a gift." I said he sounded like a flare gun who learned manners. She grinned. "Accurate." She told me Rowan runs the community center behind the library, the pale brick building that used to be a shipping office back when boats here hauled more than tourists. He started a driftline board, mutual aid, little needs and little offers, like the Tide's line of sea gifts, only with warmer socks. I pictured a cork board with slips of paper, neat handwriting, a town trading quiet rescues. "You should come by," she said, surprising me with the invitation tossed like a pebble into a shallow pool. "They're painting on Saturday. And we have more paper clips than people." I said I might. The cup warmed my hands like an argument against leaving. I asked how long she'd been a sunrise person. "Since the year everything else went dark," she said, and her voice didn't break, which felt like its own kind of story. I almost asked for that one, but the gulls shouted and the moment skated past, promising to swing back around if I kept walking this direction. On the way home I kept noticing blue things, a bow cap, a boat hull, a kid's shovel half buried like a medal. The phone case's shade of blue had wormed its way into my morning like a dye. At my apartment I set my cup down and watched steam unravel until the window fogged, turning the view into watercolor. I opened my laptop and tried to locate the version of me that writes copy for kitchenware catalogs and sighs at adjectives. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat I wasn't keeping up with. It's hard to write about knives that never dull when your own days feel like they're nicking on everything. Rowan texted just after 10 from a number labeled Driftline. "This is Rowan. Thank you for being the sort of person who answers a ringing mystery. Saturday, 10 a.m., Community Center. If you come, I'll let you win at paint rollers." I smiled at the screen like a teenager. I typed that I'd consider it. Then I added a smiley and deleted the smiley because I am 31 and suffering from chronic emoji self-consciousness. The rest of the workday happened, emails like politely folded napkins, revisions that moved commas like furniture no one sits on. Still, the morning kept flashing through, a fish surfacing and slipping away. At lunch I stood at the sink and ate an apple, catching my reflection in the dark mouth of the microwave. A person who hasn't cried in months but could if invited properly by the right song or the wrong smell. I didn't know if Saturday meant anything yet, but the idea of a wall, paint, and people who remember names felt like the opposite of the tiny room my life had been lately. At 4 Iris sent a photo, the sunrise obviously, washed in pinks that would look fake if you described them, and in the corner, a hand holding up the recovered phone like a passport returned. "For your hero file," she wrote. I typed back that my superhero name is Damned Shoes. She hard reacted, and a small, quiet brightness took a chair inside me and stayed. Saturday wore the smell of new beginnings, damp wood, opened windows, coffee strong enough to make apologies. The community center was exactly the kind of building that looks like nothing from the street and everything from the inside. High windows, a floor scuffed by generations of roller skates and bake sales, a stage with a curtain that hadn't closed properly since the 1980s. People were everywhere, easy with each other in the way of towns that keep their small promises. When I walked in, a kid handed me a blue tape roll like a coronation. Rowan found me in 3 strides, tall and kinetic, his hair the kind that can't hold apart. "You came," he said in a tone that made it sound like I just stepped into a story and stole a line. He pressed a roller into my hand and gestured to a wall that had decided to be patient with us. "Edges or bravado?" I picked edges, because edges forgive if you pay attention. Iris appeared with a tray of brushes and a grin that would have made me sign a lease on this morning. "Damned shoes," she said, and I laughed, feeling seen in a ridiculous, useful way. We painted to a playlist that didn't apologize for loving earnest anthems. Conversations braided themselves along the walls, someone talking about a grant, someone else about a lost cat who found his way home by screaming at the mailman. A woman named June told me her retirement plan is making the perfect scone over and over again for strangers until they become friends. The driftline board was real, a cork wall with cards clipped gently. Need a ride to Physio Tuesdays, can teach bicycle maintenance, extra basil seedlings if your porch is lonely. It was a catalog that didn't need adjectives. By lunchtime our hands were the color of the sky we wanted. Rowan tossed me a bottle of water and said, "You're good at this in a way that suggests you also untangle Christmas lights for people." I said yes, and that I might have a talent for rescuing stubborn knots. He nodded like he understood all the versions of that sentence. "There are worse gifts," he said, and pointed to the stage where Iris was photographing us as if we were the kind of painting worth keeping. The roller in my hand suddenly felt like something heavier, a handle on a door I'd been afraid to pull. The wall dried. We didn't exactly admire it. Admiring would have been too loud for the comfort in the room. It was more that we kept finding reasons to look back at it, the way you glance toward a friend at a party to confirm that yes, they're still there, still yours. After cleanup, Rowan showed me the storage closet where the center hides its impossible things: folding chairs with the ghosts of last summer's concerts, a box of mismatched mugs, the homemade banner reading town-wide swap that had seen more barter than a marketplace and more hugs than a church. He handed me a mug with a chip shaped like a comma. "We keep the flawed ones," he said. "They make the tea taste like it's listening." We sat on the steps that lead down to the tiny parking lot where the pavement buckles when it's hot. The day had that generous feeling, time like a long table with extra chairs dragged out. Iris joined us, rolling a damp rag between her palms as if practicing slow magic. "You live close?" she asked. I pointed toward the apartment above the florist that leaks the scent of lilies after rain. "Close enough to count the morning trucks," I said. "Close enough to hear the choir at the little church on Thursdays even if I don't go." Rowan explained the spring projects: a tool library for borrowing drills you'll use once, a seed swap to coax color out of unambitious yards, a beach clean line of volunteers after storms. "We're trying to make usefulness feel like a hobby," he said. I told him I could design flyers if they forgave typos that only reveal themselves after printing. Iris tilted her head. "We forgive things here," she said, and I wanted to ask how far that forgiveness stretched, if it could reach a heart that went quiet the day my father left without the courtesy of a slam. The sun found a gap between clouds and poured through like it had decided to stay for dinner. Rowan stood, clapped his hands, and announced, "Donuts, obviously," the team breaking into a gentle stampede. I watched them go, feeling the satisfying ache of muscles used for something outside of me, and thought maybe this is what the start of better has always looked like: paint under your nails, names in your phone, a wall drying quietly behind you, waiting for what comes next. What came next was smaller than revelation and bigger than routine. I started dropping by the center on Tuesday evenings after my last Zoom meeting, which always ended with someone saying, "Circle back," with a sincerity that made me want to stand in the ocean until the tide erased jargon. At the center, I stapled event posters to old cork, labeled bins of donated art supplies, and learned who owned which dogs by the sound of their leash tags. Rowan ran meetings like jam sessions, ideas tossed, caught, harmonized. Iris floated between us with her camera, catching the accidental meanings, a hand steadying a ladder, a laugh when the paint tray missed the drop cloth but somehow found a towel. One Tuesday, an older man named Frank came in carrying a radio that had outlived 3 mayors. He set it down like a patient. "She only sings on AM now," he said. "I don't know anything about radios, but I know about stubborn objects, and the way fixing them can feel like retrieving a part of yourself from the junk drawer." We took it to the back table. Rowan fetched a tangle of small screwdrivers as if presenting cutlery. 2 teenagers who'd been pretending not to be curious drifted over. Together we learned the radio's particular grammar. It was more listening than repair. When it finally found a clear station, a baseball game, as old as time, we looked at each other like we'd shared a secret. Frank cried a little and tried not to, and we pretended not to see and also saw. On my way out, Iris walked with me to the corner. "You're good here," she said, her voice a low ember. I shrugged. "I'm good where there are broken things that agree to be less broken." She looked at me carefully. And when they don't? The streetlight blinked on, catching a halo of gnats. Then I sit beside them, I said. We stood for a beat, and it felt like we were keeping watch over something that didn't yet have a name, willing it to arrive softly. Spring leaned forward like someone about to tell a joke. The town got green in its elbows first, ferns unfurling under porches, little flags of weeds also insisting on a debut. We planned the seed swap like a party thrown by gardeners and people who love free things equally. I designed a flyer with a cartoon shovel that Iris declared unreasonably charming, and I let the compliment sit in the bowl of my chest where need collects. Rowan collected folding tables from a church that always says yes. We argued good-naturedly about whether Basil wants sun advice on a card and decided plants don't read but people do. The morning of the swap, the center smelled like wet soil and hope. People streamed in carrying egg cartons filled with seedlings, paper bags of bulbs labeled in the sort of handwriting you inherit from your grandmother. June, the scone lady, brought lemon cakes that tasted like bright mornings after hard nights. Children ran in loops practicing their future careers as weather. There was no money at any table, just hands. A woman I'd never met pressed a small pot into my palms. Calendula, she said. For skin, for tea, for cheering up a windowsill. I told her my windowsill could use a pep talk. Iris moved through the room like choreography again, lifting her camera, lowering it, saying names. She caught me tucking the calendula next to a basil start and said, "They look like old friends who haven't been introduced yet." I asked her how many sunrises she had now. "Not enough to cover everything," she said, "but enough to start measuring the year correctly." Rowan tapped a spoon against a mug and announced an impromptu presentation by an 8-year-old named Milo on the topic of worms. The crowd applauded like he was headlining the festival. He held up a wriggler and said solemnly, "This is a friend who eats your garbage and gives you back flowers." The room laughed, and I felt something unclench that had been clenched for so long I'd started calling it personality. When the tables were half empty and the coffee pot was down to arguments, Iris asked if I'd help her deliver a tray of extra seedlings to the library garden. It was a small errand, the sort that stitches a day to its neighbor. We walked outside into a breeze that smelled faintly like rain, thinking about whether the ground was ready to listen. The library sits with its back to the marsh like it trusts reeds to keep its secrets. We knelt in the raised bed boxes and tucked basil and calendula into dirt that gave way politely, adding a scoop of compost that looked more like magic than science. Iris showed me how to settle seedlings with 2 fingers, the way you would calm a bird. "Everything appreciates a gentle introduction," she said. I wanted to ask who had introduced her to sunrise and worry and the art of staying, but the questions that matter often knock softly and wait outside. As we packed the empty trays, a familiar ringtone chirped from Iris's pocket, the phone I had found, now dirt-dusted and living its new, ordinary life. She answered. Her face shifted. All the light didn't leave, but it moved to a back room. "Okay," she said into the rectangle. "Yes. I'll come." She hung up and kept her eyes on the planted bed for a second longer than necessary. "That was the clinic," she said finally. "Mom's blood work is back weird. Nothing catastrophic, just new appointments, new spreadsheets." She laughed, and it was brittle around the edges but still hers. "Rowan will go with her. He's bedrock. I'm crossbreeze." We walked back along the path that curves behind the library, past a bench with initials carved so deep they might last longer than the couple. "Do you need anything?" I asked, and hoped I meant more than this afternoon. "Maybe just to keep doing the normal," she said. "Sometimes big things ask you to stop. But normal is a form of defiance." We reached the community center, and Rowan was there already, on his phone, drawing maps in the air with his free hand. He hung up and nodded at us, eyes clear. "Okay," he said. "We will take the scenic route through this." He said it like a promise to the whole room and all the rooms behind it. The family ones, the ones containing the private sorrow you don't post about, the ones where love learns to carry new shapes. I believed him, and I believed the town would too, and I didn't know yet what my shape in this would be, only that I wanted to find it with both hands. That week introduced a vocabulary of waiting. Iris's texts acquired pockets of ellipses. Rowan's sentences wore new muscles: reassure, arrange, repeat. I folded myself into the household of their days by doing small chores that could be done by anyone and therefore mattered more when someone actually did them: picking up Rowan's dry cleaning, restocking the tea at the center, refilling the soap pumps that always run out on the same day as patients. I discovered that service, when it isn't performance, is a way of writing your name quietly in the corner of a room you want to belong to. Work continued to be work, and I continued to be the kind of person who proofreads in grocery lines, adjusting the grammar of cereal boxes in my head. But the hours felt more shaped now, pressed into usefulness by the knowledge that a phone can turn a morning into a plan, that a small yes can be the hinge on a door you didn't know was shut. On Thursday, I walked the beach at dusk and practiced the complicated faith that comes with being alive, that the tide knows what it's doing, that light returns, that even seagulls eventually get tired of arguing. I found another scrap of blue plastic, pocketed it the way you pocket a memory of the first time, and I looked at the line the ocean leaves behind. The drift line was thick with shells, eelgrass, and the elegant handwriting of waves. When I got home, my phone buzzed. "Rowan, Mom's okay-ish. We've got a treatment plan shaped like a calendar. Iris is pretending to be casual about it, and failing adorably. Seedlings at the center are thriving like they read motivational posters at night." I smiled at the ceiling. I texted back a photo of my windowsill, calendula beginning their patient fireworks, and wrote, "The cheer squad reports for duty." Rowan replied with a heart and a rolled-up sleeve emoji he would pretend he didn't send if you teased him. Tomorrow was Friday, and I had a suspicion the weekend would ask me a bigger question in the same voice as the first one. Gentle, insistent, and very much like the ocean asking you to come closer without promising what exactly you'll find. Friday evening wore the color of quiet errands, the kind that tell a week it can finally put its feet up. Iris texted that she was at her mother's apartment adjusting plants to the soft side of the window and asked if I could bring a tray of the center's extra soup containers. They'd started a rotation so dinner could arrive like weather, regular, and not demanding thanks. I walked over with 2 paper bags knocking lightly against my knees. Iris's mom, Mara, opened the door with a smile that had fought a few good fights and kept most of its brightness. Her place smelled like cardamom and clean laundry. The TV murmured a nature documentary where every creature got a soundtrack. Rowan was already there, assembling a calendar on the fridge with magnets shaped like lighthouses. "You brought Tupperware," he said, relieved in a way that felt hilariously specific. Iris put a kettle on and touched the back of her mother's hand, a small rehearsal of steadiness. Mara asked what the town was up to. I told her about Milo's worm speech and the seed swap, and she laughed the elegant laugh of someone who knows the secret lives of ordinary things. "The trick is noticing," she said. "You can love almost anything if you notice it correctly." When the tea was poured and the soup containers stowed, Iris and I stood on the tiny balcony where the air held the day's leftover warmth. Below us the street offered its Friday playlist: silverware, far-off laughter, skateboards rehearsing the future. "You okay?" I asked. She exhaled. "Most minutes, yes. Some minutes, no. I'm getting good at stacking yes minutes." I told her I could be part of that stack. She looked at me long enough to make the air feel instructed, then nodded. "Stay for a walk after we tuck Mom in?" I said of course, and the promise hung between us like a lantern finding its job. We walked the quiet grid of streets that cradled the downtown, our steps a 4-beat pattern threaded with the soft percussion of our jackets brushing. Iris told me about the year she started chasing sunrise. "I was a night person by accident," she said. "Everything important seemed to happen after 10, edits, arguments, the invention of new fears. Then Rowan dared me to try mornings like they were a trail only I hadn't hiked. I went once and the sun opened like a slow apology. I kept going because apologies are a habit worth having." I told her how my days fell flat after my father left, and how I learned to fix small things so I wouldn't have to think about big ones. "Maybe sunrise is just a ritual that lets you practice arrival," she said. "Maybe repairs are the same." We passed the bakery where June tests scone batches at night, and the closed shop that sells postcards of our town to people who think nostalgia can be mailed. Iris's hand brushed mine, not on purpose and also not on purpose, and the world did the manageable tilt it does when meaning enters the room. We didn't reach for each other fully. Some things are better when they're allowed to breathe. Back at Mara's, Rowan met us at the door with a look that was part gratitude and part exhaustion he kept politely in his pocket. "She's fine," he said. "She asked if either of you knows how to watch a show with half your brain." We promised remedial training. Outside, we stood under the apartment's small awning while a light rain thought about becoming a conversation. Iris squeezed my arm. "Tomorrow, beach cleanup. The storm in the forecast wants an audience." I said I'd be there early with gloves and terrible jokes. "Perfect," she whispered. "Terrible jokes make the heavy bags lighter." The rain finally decided yes, and we ran laughing toward our separate doors, both of us already facing the shore in our heads. In the night the storm arrived like a guest who knows where the cups are. Morning found the boardwalk wearing the sea's jewelry, knotted ropes, driftwood like calligraphy, bottle caps transformed into confetti pretending to celebrate. The air had that scrubbed-after feeling, the way a room feels once the argument is over and the window's been cracked. Rowan's clipboard appeared as if it had been summoned by civic intention. "Teams of 3, he said, ordinary and heroic. Iris looped a bandana around her hair like a flag for optimism and handed me a trash grabber that looked like a toy but felt like competence. We spread out along the rack line. I worked with a teenager named Dee who knew the Latin names of half the shells and a retired nurse named Alma who told the kind of stories that make you consider time differently. We filled bags until our shoulders noticed, then we filled more. It wasn't a single grand act. It was 50 small ones stacked and handed down the line. Every so often we'd look up and catch each other's eyes, little check-ins that said keep going and we are. Near the pier, I found a ruined wooden sign whose paint had mostly surrendered. Only one word remained, kind. I held it up and Alma laughed. "The ocean's editorial instincts are good." We propped the sign on the center supply table like a thesis. Rowan took a picture of it and said he'd hang it by the drift-line board. Iris photographed us against the pale sky, everyone a little damp, a little brighter than sleep allows. By noon the beach looked more like itself, the kind a child would draw with a yellow crayon and a big, uncomplicated smile. When we finally sat in a huddle with thermoses, Dee asked if doing this changes anything. Alma said, "It changes this today," and tapped the sand. Rowan added, "And it changes us, which is not nothing." Iris glanced at me, something unspoken moving through that look, and I knew that tomorrow and the day after, I would keep choosing the version of myself that shows up with gloves and stays. The town kept us busy because towns know how to do that when you let them. I helped Rowan assemble shelves for the tool library in a corner room that smelled like cedar and ambition. We sorted hammers into the comfortingly named and the oddly specific, labeled drill bits with Tate flags, debated whether a person could borrow a ladder, and also luck. Iris documented the cataloging like a wildlife photographer catching a rare species. 2 adults cooperating near an IKEA hex key without swearing allegiance to chaos. "Smile like you've just convinced a stubborn bolt to be reasonable," she said, and I smiled like someone who had. At lunch, Rowan pitched me an idea. "We should make the tool library less intimidating," he said. "Zines, maybe? 1-pagers with drawings and plain talk, how to hang a shelf without cursing your future self." He knew my copywriting itch could be redirected from knives to something kinder. We sat on the floor with markers and sketched a series we called Gentle Instructions. I wrote, "Measure once, then measure again when no one's watching," and Rowan added, "If the wall is crooked, respect its truth and shim with dignity." We laughed, and also meant every word. By afternoon, the zine stack looked like a permission slip to try. Iris drifted in with new prints from the cleanup, including the kind sign haloed by gulls. "I like this one," she said, tacking it near the cork board. "It feels like the beach wrote us a note." People paused to look, and some touched the frame absent-mindedly, the way you do when a thing says exactly what you needed it to. I caught my name on Iris's lips in a way that wasn't a call-out but a small holding. Outside, rain threatened and then forgot to follow through. "Dinner?" she asked. "I promised Mara we bring home something reckless and healthy." I said tacos, because those are both, and she nodded. On the way out she brushed my sleeve with her fingers, a touch light enough to be mistaken for accident, unless you were paying attention the way we both had been learning to. We ate on Mara's couch, the three of us balancing plates like a circus act honed by love. Mara told us about the nurse who hums old songs when she changes 4 bags and how the clinic's coffee tastes like hot guilt unless you bring your own mug. Rowan recounted a tool checkout disaster in which a man borrowed a circular saw and returned with banana bread as collateral. "We kept the bread in the saw," he said. "Mutual trust, but with icing." Iris photographed us mid-bite, claiming candids are honest. "Honest about my saw stains," Rowan said, and he had 3. After dinner, Mara asked for my sunrise story because she collects them, apparently, the way some people collect saint cards. I told her about the morning the ocean looked like it had forgotten how to be water and was trying on silk instead, about the gulls arranging themselves like commas, about how the first light hit the apartment windows across the street and gave every stranger a brief cameo in gold. She closed her eyes while I talked, as if filing away the images for later. "Keep bringing me mornings," she said. "Even the ones that happen at night." On the walk home, Iris linked her arm through mine, easy as breath. "Mom likes you," she said. "Mara likes people who make rooms feel wider." I wanted to say that Iris did that for me the first second her voice arrived through a found phone. Instead, I said I'd make a list of sunrise descriptions suitable for 4-day. "Make it a long list," she said, and there was something in her voice that made me imagine winter ending decisively, and the calendar letting us move everything outside. At the corner we paused, reluctant to unhook. "Tomorrow I have shoots early," she said. "Text me if your day needs rescuing." I promised. Even if it didn't, I suspected, I would invent a small rescue just to keep the line warm. Weeks arranged themselves like flags on a string. Work stopped feeling like a narrow hallway and started feeling like a house with more doors. The tool zines multiplied. Gentle instructions became the kind of joke people respected. "How to Apologize to a Wall You Misjudged" was our bestseller. We hosted a Saturday fix-it clinic where Alma reupholstered a chair with the patience of seasons, and Frank taught a teenager to solder while telling him the precise weather of the summer he met his wife. The radio we had coaxed back to life sat on the counter, occasionally clearing its throat to deliver baseball metaphors and the exact time with suspicious confidence. Iris and I built a small rhythm. I'd meet her after a shoot and we'd walk nowhere in particular, talking in the way that feels like cleaning a mirror, gently, with the understanding that clarity can be invited but not forced. She told me about the city she left, its noisy generosity, the way it held her ambition like a beloved, constant argument. "I thought leaving meant losing," she said. "But leaving meant making space for all the things I'd been telling myself were hobbies. Turns out they were the real project." I told her I had been living like a person who kept a go bag near the door of every feeling. "How exhausting," she said softly, and I didn't realize I needed someone to call it that until she did. One dusk, we sat on the beach steps and watched the horizon practice its slow costume change. Iris slipped a small print into my hand, the boardwalk at dawn, empty except for a single gull mid-flight, all wing and intent. On the bottom she'd written, "For the person who answered." I traced the ink with my thumb like a superstition. "I don't know what I'm becoming," I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Maybe becoming is the whole point," she said. The tide agreed by doing what it always does, returning, then making you believe it was gone for longer than it was. News about Mara didn't come in dramatic chords. It came in careful clarinets, counts inside counts, numbers that learned to behave, energy that returned enough to iron one shirt and call that victory. We adjusted our lives accordingly, and the town adjusted with us, as towns do when they are paying attention. June sent biscuits with politely aggressive notes, "Eat or else." Dee biked over with a plant and the instruction. Talk to it like a weather report. Alma left a voicemail telling the story of a storm 50 years ago that scared everyone into a block party. Rowan started calling the calendar our choreography, and I started believing in a future that had steps for me. Work asked me to travel for a week to a trade show where the knives were shiny enough to reflect your doubts. I almost said yes automatically, the way I used to when any opportunity approached, afraid that no might make the world smaller. Instead, I thought of the center's Tuesday meetings and Mara's Thursdays and the beach's Saturdays, and I wrote back that I'd attend remotely, design the booth copy from here, and save my plane ticket energy for something with less airport. My manager said okay with a sliver of surprise that felt like a blessing disguised as detachment. Iris, hearing my decision, squeezed my hand like I'd just lifted a weight she had been ready to catch. The next morning, I caught the sunrise alone. The water wore pewter and then, quietly, lit itself from within like memory does when it's ready to help. I stood with my hands in my jacket and felt the hour open. Look, I said aloud to no one and to everyone. I am here. A gull skated the wind, unbothered by metaphor. I walked home with the kind of calm that you can fold and keep in your pocket for later. At the corner by the florist, I texted Iris a photo of the sky's first shout of pink. She responded with Mara holding a mug, sleepy and queenly, and wrote, "Your sunrise delivered." Summer crawled up the calendar like a vine, deciding any direction would be fine so long as there was light. The community center's doors were propped most days, kids sliding in and out like sand through fingers, older folks pausing for a chair and a chat that never seemed to run out of road. We launched the tool library officially with a sign Iris painted in the shade of an old sky and a ribbon that Rowan insisted could be metaphorical to save money. People came to borrow rakes and returned with tomatoes. Someone checked out a jigsaw and brought back cookies and a story about mismeasured birdhouses and the highs of bird forgiveness. I wrote more gentle instructions. How to ask for help without apologizing was, technically, not about tools, and also technically about the only tool that matters. We stapled it by the driftline board, and I watched 3 people read it and then pull a tab with our phone number. Dee ran a build a kite afternoon, refusing to let anyone leave until their creation had flown at least once or made them laugh trying. Frank tuned a swarm of donated radios and declared that 10 a.m. belonged to the old jazz station that survived every decade like a stubborn oak. In the cool of one evening, as we stacked folding chairs that seemed to multiply when you weren't looking, Rowan said, "You know you're part of the choreography now, right?" I shrugged because shrugging is easier than celebration. He leveled me with a kind smile. "Admit it," he said. "You made us better at being us." I swallowed around the lump compliment spilled and nodded. Iris, locking the back door, called over her shoulder, "We're keeping you." Like a decision the town had taken and signed. I pretended to argue and failed, and the failure felt like belonging. That weekend, a storm missed us on the map but sent us its shoulder. The waves were high enough to talk about and low enough to photograph. Iris asked if I'd come along for sunrise with a thermos and the job of noticing. We met at the south end, our breath briefly visible, the gulls already in committee. She set the tripod and moved with the economy of someone who has put down the same legs 1,000 times. "Today looks like brushed steel," she said. I poured coffee into cup lids and handed one over. We watched thin lines of light scratch the horizon. "This is the part where I always think nothing will happen," she admitted. "And then it does, casually, like it's a friend who lives next door." I noticed the way the water wrote and rewrote our footprints, and decided to count the seconds between the dark and the first color, not as science but as offering. When the pink finally pushed through, it wasn't dramatic, it was persuasive. Iris clicked and adjusted, clicked and smiled. "Every single time," she whispered. "It remembers how." The two of us stood there and tried to remember, too, to store the instructions somewhere we could find it later on bad afternoons. When we walked back, a woman in a red coat waved us down and asked for a photo with her elderly dog at the railing. Iris knelt and showed the dog the camera like a formal introduction, then took 3 frames and one more just in case. The woman hugged her with the fierce gratitude of someone who knows documents keep us steady. "Thank you," she said to me, too, for handing the dog a treat from my pocket I didn't remember putting there. "You're welcome," I said, and thought about how often welcome is the truest thing we can offer. Iris slipped her hand into mine and left it there until our shadows ran out at the curb. Rowan's idea for a neighborhood night turned into something between a fair and a porch sit. He called it Lantern Evening, and the town arrived carrying jars with candles and stories. We strung lights in the center's yard, scattered blankets across the stubborn grass, and let the kids campaign for control of the playlist. June's scones appeared with the confidence of a tradition. Alma set up a mending table where Jeans learned to forgive knees. Frank tuned a radio to the jazz station and declared it background oxygen. I printed the first compilation of gentle instructions and watched people flip through it smiling like they were reading a letter from a friend. As the sky dimmed, Iris set up a small backdrop by the brick wall and called anyone who wanted a portrait to come stand in the kindness of her lens. Mara sat for one, regal in a scarf the color of ripe mango, and when she saw the image on the tiny screen, she wiped tears like she'd encountered a future she recognized. I read a short piece I'd written, just a handful of paragraphs about drift lines and found phones and the kind of luck that looks like work. My voice did not betray me. People listen the way you hope they will, as if the words were small stones arranged into a path, not a performance. After, Iris found me by the lemonade and bumped my shoulder with hers. "You write like you're opening windows," she said, and I catalogued the compliment beside the others that had begun to build a structure inside me. Rowan climbed the steps and announced that the last item on the agenda was simple: look around and memorize 3 faces, because later you might need to imagine them and know you are not alone. We did as told. Lamps glowed. Jazz threaded through conversations. The night gently said yes. When we cleaned up, it felt less like ending and more like pausing, the kind of pause that invites a next page, which, I realized was something like we were very much writing together. The morning after Lantern Evening, the beach felt like a page we'd written on together, and then smoothed with our palms. The storms had taken a breath. The water was glass with opinions. Rowan walked ahead carrying a thermos like a torch, his coat unzipped in defiance of the chill. Iris kept pace with me, tripod over her shoulder, the strap thumping a soft heartbeat against her back. We'd coaxed Mara out for first light. She wanted to see what we talk about so often that it has become a second language. "I'll translate," Rowan promised, and she smiled as if grateful for the joke before the sunrise. We settled by the low rail. Iris unfolded the tripod and framed the horizon with the practiced tenderness of someone braiding hair. "Hold still," she told the morning, then glanced at me, and the look said we both knew stillness was a kind of myth and also a kind of mercy. Mara leaned on the rail, mug between her hands, steam writing a brief story that the air kept editing. "It's quieter than I imagined," she said, and I knew she didn't mean sound. The first stripe of pink arrived without ceremony, unrolling like ribbon from a pocket. Gulls arranged themselves into punctuation, commas at the edge of a sentence we were lucky to read. Rowan poured coffee, and from the community center's tote he'd brought the kind sign we'd rescued and framed. He held it up to the light as if asking permission, then laughed. "It belongs everywhere," he said, which was somehow also about us. Iris clicked, paused, her breath matching the slow pulse of color. When she lowered the camera, she didn't check the screen. She tucked it and reached for my hand instead, as if the proof could live in touch. Behind us, the town woke with its modest fanfare, truck brakes, a door's soft complaint, the bakery practicing warmth. I thought of gentle instructions stacked by the cork board, of Dee's kites, of Frank's radio declaring the same minute to anyone who would listen. I thought of my desk at home and the copy that used to feel like a hallway, and how lately even the knives had started to sound like invitation when I wrote about them as if they were for kitchens that held laughter. The drift line in front of us was clean today, narrow and neat, but I knew tomorrow it would gather new gifts, new knots to work at with patient fingers. Mara took a careful sip, watching the horizon complete its quiet trick. "Keep bringing me mornings," she said again, and this time she meant all of us, and also anyone who needed one. Rowan tucked the kind sign under his arm and pointed up the boardwalk. "Breakfast," he declared. "For anyone willing to count this as church." We turned toward town, our footsteps writing and unwriting themselves. Iris squeezed my hand and did not let go. We passed the place where a blue phone once lay in a nest of kelp, and I heard the phantom ring of that first call, the one I answered without knowing the shape of its request. Some days I will still need the ocean to bench press my brain. Some days the paint will not dry as quickly as we hope, and the basil will sulk, and even gentle instructions will feel like riddles. But the choreography is ours now, small yes after small yes, a wall drying behind us, a calendar shaped like care, a sunrise learning our names. We reached the first open door. Warmth met us like someone who had been expecting company. I looked back once at the water and felt the simple certainty that had been building all along. I answered a ring on an empty beach, and the year answered back, and this ordinary, threaded, generous life, said yes right along with it.